Welcome, everyone. It is March the 16th, 2021, and we are about to complete our first day of learning from the land through Wabanaki watershed, but with guests from Mi'kmaq territory and from as far west as I'll say TH territory. I am going to ask you to mute your mics if you don't mind, and I would like to honor and acknowledge the land that we're coming together on as ancestral territory of where I am, Mi'kmaq peoples, but maybe where you are, it's different. If you're in New Brunswick, it could be Passamaquoddy, or it could be the beautiful Wolastoq. I am so excited to introduce you to Rian Lougheed-Smith. Rian is a friend slash former student slash envirothonner from 2001, a championship envirothon team, I might add. And Rian has left New Brunswick and found love and found a life in the Yukon, and she is living very much on the land and with the land, and raising her family to learn lots from the land and her friends in Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in First Nation. Rian, please give us the proper pronunciation as you go through your slide, and thank you so much for joining us today. And we're recording you, as you know, so more students will probably enjoy your presentation as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Rian, who I haven't seen in 15 years, when she attended my wedding back in 2016. So welcome, Rian.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Our pleasure.
So I am coming to you from the traditional territory of the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in here in Dawson City, Yukon. So before I start sharing slides, I'm just going to talk a little about me. I give you a little bit of context about why I'm here today, but I also want to apologize because I had some friends that I had intended to join me in this session, members of Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in citizens, but there was a death of an elder a couple of days ago. So you guys are stuck with me, unfortunately. It may not be as exciting or interesting. But yeah, so I'm Rian Lougheed-Smith, former Envirothon nerd. I was surprised. I was afraid Pamela was going to bring up my high school nickname, which was Bug Diva, because I was very good at identifying invertebrates. Maybe there are some other bug divas out there in the crowd, maybe. I've lived in the Yukon now for 11 years. I grew up in New Brunswick in Harvey Station, outside of Fredericton, in the traditional territory of the Listowig. So I ended up going to Mount Allison University, where I started studying anthropology, and I loved it. But I very quickly kind of realized that I liked learning about other people's, but I wasn't as into anthropology, if you guys maybe do or don't know, is the study of other people, of other cultures. And its history is very much of old white dudes visiting other places and discovering things. I kind of realized very quickly that that wasn't kind of what I wanted to do. But through my time at Mount A, I learned a lot. I studied kind of a subcategory of anthropology, which is called ethnobotany. So that's the study of how people use plants, how plants affect people. And I got a chance to, I was invited to and got to know some citizens in Tr'ondëk, also some Métis elders in the New Brunswick region. And also growing up, I got to spend a lot of time in the Wolastoq region with Wolastoq people, mostly from Kingsclear First Nation, through kind of my dad's work and connections. Yeah, so I kind of had like an intro to what I thought um, an indigenous mindset was. And I thought I had a pretty solid appreciation of that. And then I moved to the Yukon. So I'm gonna share my screen now. Let's see if it'll work. Oh no, sorry guys, 1 second. Wow.
I recognize Sierra.
Yep. No, I'm getting oh man. You guys might just have to listen to me talk the whole time. That would be unfortunate. Okay, can you see me?
We
you guys
can
see my
see you, Ryan, and we can see, is it Catalina or Sierra? We can see your desktop.
Okay, can you see? You can't see my slideshow. Okay. 1 second.
You're viewing
Okay, here.
Ryan's screen. Anybody want to chime in, feel free.
It now.
There you go. Yay.
Okay.
And you
All
can
right,
enlarge it, Ryan. Just
Okay.
enlarge it a little bit for us by getting rid of your thumbnails, maybe.
All right. Okay. So this is
Okay,
just a picture of some of
we've
my
lost
backyard.
you. We lost you.
Okay. Sorry, guys.
Okay, we're
I'm
patient.
not sure. I'm wondering if maybe issue. Maybe I live in the middle of nowhere. Not the middle of nowhere. I live in Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in traditional territory in a very special place, but we have to access our house by canoe, and we have satellite internet, and sometimes it doesn't like things. Let me try one more time.
Try it again. And maybe participants, should we take our videos off? There you go, learning from the land. Okay, just leave it there then.
Okay, sorry, you guys have to see these thumbnails.
That's okay.
There we go. Let's try this. So, thank you very much for having me. It's nice to talk to New Brunswick. So I, just in case you don't know where the Yukon is, there's a map up here. I'm that pink star. So I'm pretty close to as far away as you can get from New Brunswick while still staying within the borders of Canada. And as I was saying, I've been here for 11 years. The Yukon is amazing for many reasons. Before I moved here, the primary thing I thought of was wilderness, you know, like it would be this untouched place. When I moved here, I sold all of my fancy dress up clothes and bought a really nice parka and a very functional long underwear and snow boots and things. This is our house. This is my daughter. That's me in a canoe. So that's how we get to our house. We canoe across a river. And I didn't grow up to be an anthropologist. I've done a lot of different things in my time here in Dawson. I've worked as an environmental assessment officer for almost 6 years. I went to art school here. I worked as a bartender. I did a brief stint as a professional wrestler. I've had a chance to do a lot of really different, really strange things here. But one of the most amazing things has been learning from my community here. So Dawson City, you guys might be able to find it, is on sort of close to the border of Alaska here. See, and it's on the Yukon River. It's a small community. We have about 2,000, 2,500 residents. And yeah, one of the things that struck me when I first moved to the Yukon, when I first looked at a map, was like, whoa, look, there's so few roads. Most places you look at, and New Brunswick, if you look at a map of New Brunswick, like there are large areas where there's, if you look at just like a normal map, where there's cities and towns and hamlets and villages, and there's roads everywhere. Here, basically the main road, you can drive to Whitehorse. You get into Whitehorse from BC, you can go left to Alaska, right to Teslin and Watson Lake, or you can go north to Dawson. And then from Dawson, you can go even further north and eventually end up in Fort McPherson and Aklavik in the Northwest Territories. So looking at this map, one of the things that you might assume is like, there aren't many people there. And there aren't, that is true. We are kind of a sparsely populated territory. But if you look at a different kind of map, you'll see that if you take the roads out of the equations, if you start thinking about rivers and overland routes, there is a really diverse group of people here in the Yukon. So these are traditional territories of Indigenous people of the Yukon, and also settlement areas of the Nubialewit. So there's different ways to look at a place. Western maps aren't always the best way. So I live kind of smack dab in the middle of Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in Traditional Territory. And this is a closer map of that. The other thing with this being a Western map, and one thing you might notice, is that there's a couple of very straight lines. And that comes from the fact that this traditional territory, this map, it's dated 2019, but this was decided in a Western judicial system through lands claims. So the traditional territory, or the area that the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in would have used, would have extended into Alaska. That long straight line on the left-hand side is a border. And when that border was put in, and this didn't just happen in the Yukon, but it divided families, it divided cultural groups, it divided clans, it interrupted trade routes, all kinds of things. So all this to say that there are lots of ways of looking at a place, and kind of Google Maps is maybe not always the most accurate. So the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in, who are the people whose land I live on, they're descended from, the name basically means people of the Klondike River. And they can be defined as kind of a Han-speaking people. And these people have lived along the Yukon River for millennia. The Yukon has some of the oldest archaeological sites or evidence of human habitation of North America. And the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in and all the Indigenous people of the Yukon have stories and histories of their people arriving in the Yukon. And these people, so they've been here for millennia. And many of these people, their ancestors were here also during the same time as mammoths, all kinds of creatures that are now extinct. And so, yeah, the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in are a diverse group. And they're not also the only Indigenous people who live here in Dawson. There's lots of people from other communities who live here, and even communities across Canada. But the population of our town is, I don't have hard and fast numbers, but they're probably around, I would say, at least 50% Indigenous to settler population. So you guys, I missed some of the sessions this morning. Most of you have probably heard of the word traditional territory, and it's pretty basically an area or a territory that has traditionally been used by an Indigenous group. So the way that Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in people and their government describe this is that the Han people traveled over this massive area for food, for trade, for shelter, and just to check up on things of 10,000 square kilometers through all seasons. So this area is what is now recognized as traditional territory, and it is still known and used by Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in people for traditional and cultural subsistence purposes. I promise I'm going to get out of the boring history lesson, but it's also kind of interesting. So about 15,000 years ago, we have the ancestors of Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in and also Yukon First Nations crossing the Bering Land Bridge into modern day Alaska and Yukon. And then between now and then, those people, adapted and created cultures to live in specific micro regions of the Yukon. They had complex trade routes and potlatches, all kinds of things. There's lots of evidence and history of people having these trade routes all the way to the Alaskan coast. And so this period, it's a long period, but it's not an empty one. There's lots of stories and history within these communities demonstrating that there was a lot happening during the Yukon during that time. It wasn't, as the first explorers who came, untouched wilderness. The kind of Western idea that you're going to this place and discovering it, and that there's nothing there, is very colonial, very much like the anthropologists of old, going and describing something. But just because there were no bridges or roads or museums doesn't mean that there weren't people everywhere using the land and appreciating it. So before the gold rush in 1898, Yukon First Nations would encounter the odd trapper or explorer. But then all of a sudden, when gold was discovered, 40,000 settlers and white prospectors arrived in the Yukon. A large majority of them arrived in the Klondike. So when they land in what they're soon to call Dawson City, they set up camp, kind of foolishly, where our town still is, in a swamp or in a wetland, floodplain of the Yukon River, in an area that was traditionally used as a summer fish camp by the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in. This gentleman in the photo here is Chief Isaac, who was one of the leaders of the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in at this time. And he is kind of celebrated by the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in for his foresight, in that he saw kind of what was happening. He was hesitant about this influx of new people, and he moved the entire community downstream to what is now called Moosehide, and it's still a community where not many people live year-round, but oftentimes elders and Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in citizens will go live there all summer. The other thing that Chief Isaac is really celebrated for is he was very worried about protecting their culture. And so what he did was he sent with citizens their songs and their stories across the border into communities in Alaska for safekeeping. And those communities in Alaska kept teaching their children those stories, continuing that tradition. And then recently, like in the 90s, those stories and songs have started coming back. So biannually, the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in have this amazing gathering called Moosehide Gathering. It's based on the tradition of potlatch, and where people, Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in citizens from all over the world, come to Dawson, travel down to Moosehide. All citizens of Dawson are welcome, including white people like me. Everyone's welcome. They also have relationships with other First Nations and Indigenous people. In 2018, there was a Maori group who came, and it's kind of a place where, so one of the reasons they have these is to gather, to talk, to teach these songs and stories to each other, and also to communicate with other people in Indigenous groups about directions they can take, about what reconciliation can look like, about what self-governance can look like. So it's a really amazing event. Everyone gets fed for free. Everyone is welcome. It's a massive logistical undertaking because the only access to this community is by river. So there are motorboats going all day long, ferrying people downriver. And anyway, it's amazing. So that's something Chief Isaac is celebrated for, is sending these songs away. After the gold rush, things calmed down a little in the Yukon. There was a lot of people who left when the gold was gone. But the legacy of kind of settlers being here stayed. The first mission or residential school in the Yukon uh, was in 1911, and the last one closed in 1970. So that kind of attack on Indigenous culture in the Yukon has a long-lasting legacy, as it does in most places in Canada, all I would argue. And on the heels of that, around the same time that these schools were closing, Yukon First Nations started their land claims fight. So the Yukon First Nations and Indigenous peoples didn't sign or cede their territory at first contact with Westerners. And in 1970, although there had been lots of communication before then of people trying to follow this route, 1970 is kind of when land claims first really started. So land claims were kind of the legal battle that here in the Yukon and also lots of other places, but this is the area I know the most about, and I am not a lawyer. The fight basically for Indigenous peoples to have self-governance or rights for over their own lands and territories. So it took over 20 years for Yukon First Nations to settle their land claims process. They all worked together initially, and then to have kind of a general umbrella agreement. And they called that agreement Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow. And a few of the chiefs have also made it clear that for our children tomorrow is not specific to Indigenous youth, it's for all the children of the Yukon. Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in's final agreement was finally signed in 1998. And so Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in is a self-governing First Nation. They have their own settlement lands, which means that there are lands that they have legal right, they own, and they have varying levels of legal rights over. So they can do what they would like with it, or also can say what kind of needs to happen for activities to happen on that land. So if you want to mine on settlement land, it's probably not going to happen unless you have the permission of the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in. A few other really interesting things came from land claims. One of the things that is most obvious to me and I find the most interesting is that in our community, Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in has equal footing in our public school with the Yukon government in terms of determining curriculum, in terms of having a presence in the school. So when you walk into Robert Service School, all of the signage, or most of it, is in Han. If you go in and get a late slip, they're not called late slips, they're called "We're happy to see you" slips, and that is written in Han. My daughter, who is in kindergarten, or sorry, she's in grade 1 now, but in kindergarten started taking Han lessons. So she is learning the local language. I've been able to learn a little bit with her. But the amazing thing about learning a language is that you don't just learn the language. So she has learned, like most languages, when you learn it as a little kid, you learn songs. So she's learned songs about Tr'ondëk, which is the moose. And in that song, it talks about how they give us food, they give us shelter, they keep us warm. You're learning things about a culture too. You're not just learning language. And it's making it, it's a part of everyday life in the school here. So I just want to talk to you guys a little bit. One of the big things I've learned being here on traditional territory of the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in is I've thought long and hard about how I, as a settler, can be and live here in a respectful way. So the traditional territory, parts of it are owned as settlement land by Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in, but the kind of important features of the definition of it is that we maintain certain rights, like Aboriginal hunting rights, within our traditional territory. So we in the mainstream, and when there's stereotyping a lot of the times, and we still have it happening here in the Yukon and everywhere, people like to talk about how certain groups, minority groups, get rights, like they get things that I don't get, blah blah blah. There's a whole bunch of arguments against that, but the important thing is it's not just that. In this definition, the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in have responsibilities and authorities regarding the activities and decision making within these traditional territories, and that those responsibilities are taken incredibly seriously by our community. And we're gonna watch a video shortly about the first fish camp here in Dawson. There's a series of culture camps throughout the year, every year, for children and youth in Dawson, all children and youth in Dawson, to learn traditional skills and how to be on the land in a right way, in a respectful way. And those are usually centered around harvesting. So there's a fish camp where kids go learn to fish salmon. There's caribou camp where you go learn to hunt a caribou, and there's moose camp where you go learn to hunt moose. But that's not all you learn while you're out there. You learn plants, you learn ecology, you learn science, you learn Han, you learn songs, you learn stories, you learn a lot. So we're gonna watch this video now, if my internet cooperates. And for a little bit of context, there are two species of salmon who spend a lot of time in the Yukon River in our region: the Chinook salmon, or the king salmon, and also the chum salmon. So the Chinook salmon run is early in the summer, and that's kind of like the prize food and the traditional food of the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in. The chum salmon run is later in the fall, and it's a smaller species of fish. And it's still delicious, but it's not as prized. It was traditionally used to feed sled dogs. So these fish stocks, though, the chum stocks have dropped drastically last year, and they didn't open the commercial fishery. The Chinook salmon stocks have been low for almost 2 decades now. Many Indigenous groups along the Yukon River, not just in Canada, but in Alaska, have voluntarily stopped fishing in the hopes that it will help restore these fish stocks, and that this important food and part of their culture can rebound. That hasn't been the case yet. There's lots of finger pointing and possible reasons for this, but there are commercial fisheries that catch these fish at the mouth of the Yukon before they're able to travel up to spawn. And that's one of the possible kind of reasonings behind that. Anyway, let's see if we can get this video to go. Okay. All right.
Once again, we come before you to give thanks. We give thanks this day for the blessings of this fish that we have gotten and that we have harvested.
Sorry, I thought I heard someone talking there. Is everyone able to see this? Okay, I'm gonna play again.
And cut up to dry. We are so grateful that we are able to have some fish today to pass on the teachings to our young ones. We are grateful for this day and for the blessings. We also at this time want to ask you, Kahusatcho, if you could please send back to us the king salmon, who is not so plentiful at this time. We have honored and respected them in terms of not fishing this year, and we want them to be plentiful once again for our children. We are grateful that all First Nations and everyone has honored this great time in letting our king salmons become plentiful once again.
There's a lot of people in this town that have committed to not fishing, and as hard as it is on some people, the big thing that I think is making sure that not just my kids, everybody's kids will be able to see a healthy run of salmon where we can fish them and be sustainable and be smarter about it. I know that there's a lot of contributing factors, not just human consumption, that contribute to the declines. So are we too late? I don't know. One of the things that upsets me most of the people, I think, it's their inherent right to fish. And it's my kid's inherent right to fish too. If the stocks are unhealthy, then we have to sit back and take some time and see what happens. Maybe they won't rebound. I have to rely on chum the rest of our lives. But at least then I'll be teaching my kids how to fish.
At this camp, nowadays we have First Nation and non-First Nation children and youth coming to the camp and having a chance to witness and see the things that you need to know in order to prepare you for a time when you want to help your family out or you want to help your people out to be able to harvest for an important food.
Today, though, we don't have any salmon. Everybody knows that. And it's kind of hard for us to give up our fishing. But we have to think about our young people coming too, and we're hoping that the fish come back.
Things are a little bit different now with the First Fish Youth Camp. We're no longer fishing Chinook salmon. We're using alternative fishing now. We fished chum salmon last fall for the First Fish Youth Camp this year. We're using alternative methods for teaching our youth how to use salmon, which is a nutritional food source for our people. Teaching our youth about salmon and the kinds of important foods that we use is really important to pass on from one generation to another. It's a part of maintaining our culture, maintaining our lifestyle, our traditions. It's something that we don't want to lose.
What could we do? What give kids some hope, something? This better day coming.
I think it's important to keep the part of our heritage, to keep it going throughout our generations, and for our elders to be able to help. Like, there's not a lot of time for people to do things, and when we schedule these camps, it gives elders and children time to be together, and for the elders to pass on their knowledge, and for to the people like me that have been coming to these camps to also pass on my knowledge to the younger generations.
Hwëch'in people have been alive for a long time, and they've been surviving for a long time, and they've had great traditions. And after the gold rush, it all started dying and going away, and these camps bring it back.
You'll remember the skills you learned, and teach your children and your grandchildren and your friends.
Like, now I feel bad for the kids because they just get the fish already frozen. Half of the fun was actually going out on the boat and actually pulling up the net, taking the fish. But they still get the experience, but not the full experience.
First fish should stay like this forever. It shouldn't change at all.
Okay. All right. Oh no, I just saw that. Sorry guys, I just saw your message that everyone could only hear the audio. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. We got the
Bummer. Yes, no, it is on YouTube. And it's only 8 minutes long. I recommend that everyone watch it. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. It said it was sharing. So that was made just about 10 years ago, that film. And they're still having to use frozen chum salmon. So when Roberta Joseph, who's now the chief of Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in, was talking there about using alternative fishing methods, what she means is that every fall they fish for chum, which is, although that may change now soon because those stocks are also depleting, they fish for chum salmon, freeze it over the winter, and then thaw it out in the summer to use during these camps, so that they're still able to teach kids about the salmon, about cleaning them, and everything that comes along with learning that. The Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in also have a YouTube channel. I'm not sure if it's on there, but you can search that, and I can also send out some links after this that Pamela can probably send to everyone. But they've got a lot of really cool resources there. And yeah. Kind of coming up to the end of time. Mostly what I wanted to talk to you about after that video, and the thing that I've learned a lot about being here, is that the best way to learn from the land is to talk to the people who've been here forever, but also something we can all do, and something I've seen here, and that is a big part of Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in culture. You could call it stewardship. It's a really common idea when it comes to Indigenous land management, or just being someone who kind of takes care of things. But I think the biggest part about that is being out there. And you can do this wherever you are, but just finding a place and spending time there, going there during all different kinds of weather. That you can do this in a park, you can do this in your backyard, no matter how small it is. But one of the really big practices here is just being on the land. And like when you saw that huge piece of territory, there were families and groups who traveled the same route every single year. And that means that they got to see this place during all different kinds of weather, all different kinds of seasons. You get the chance to, when you're in the same context there, to see how a plant changes throughout a year, how a forest changes throughout a year, what happens when there's forest fires. And in the like sad case in this instance, but of the salmon, you get to see what happens to a whole population of creatures. You can even do this with a house plant if you want to. You can spend time with something, a plant, an animal, or a place, and just check it out, look at it in all different kinds of scenarios. And that kind of listening and sitting with the land is one of the best things I've ever learned. And also kind of a way to engage with land in a different way. You don't always need to learn the scientific names for things, which is what I spent a lot of time doing in school. I would much rather, and I've learned a lot more from learning the indigenous names for things, because with traditional language and things, there always come stories and context and ideas. So I would say, and a lot of this stuff, you don't need to be best friends with an elder to learn these things. That's a great opportunity. But you can find stuff online. You can attend things like this. And you can just be open-minded and respectful and listen, and you'll learn a lot. I'm very sorry again about the video. It's a bummer, but please everyone go watch it. And I guess maybe I'll open up to questions if there's anything you'd like to know or ask.
Great, Ryan. That was fantastic. You make me proud. I love how you ended your presentation, but you also ended today with just reinforcing that sense of place. Here you have left home, gone as far away as you possibly could have, yet you have a sense of place that many of us who have lived here our entire lives don't have. And I'm speaking for youth especially, and having them try to get to know just their watershed and define their map, you know, in a non-colonial way by watershed and by topography, and learn what are the concerns and the issues within your place, and connect with it and start there and go global. And that has become a real challenge for many of our grade 11 and 12 students who I'm still dealing with today, just to get familiar with their community. And thank you for emphasizing that, and that you can do that wherever you are. Makes sense to do it where you live. And you've got a home.
I also, and I think watersheds are awesome, but also you can kick that down a notch too. Like, get to know one tree, which sounds totally hokey pokey, but you don't need to hug it if you don't want to. You don't need to talk to it if you don't want to. But there are trees where I grew up in New Brunswick that I have literally been visiting on walks since I was a year old, you know, and being able to spend time with a place or even just a tree. And you can do this in downtown Moncton. Like, they're just watch something repeatedly for a long time, and that'll teach you a lot. And there are a lot of connections to be made from one tree to your entire watershed or even bigger. There are plants here in Dawson that grow around the circumpolar world, which makes connections between Indigenous groups all over the planet, you know, who live in the boreal forest. There are plants whose names I learned studying ethnobotany in Sackville, New Brunswick, that I use almost every day here now. So you can start small, and hug the tree if you want to. I'm also not discouraging that, but I really encourage people to just and the science is awesome, but just observe things on your own. Notice what's growing on the tree. You don't have to look up all the words or understand all the concepts, but there's a lot to be learned from just spending time in a place.
Mm-hmm. Somebody's written, Anna has written, it sounds like a permaculture principle: observe and interact. I agree.
Yeah, and that's Totally. That's also one of my other things showing, which is that since I stopped being an environmental assessment officer, I'm now a farmer. I love permaculture. So that's where
Oh,
that's coming.
fantastic. And you continue to do beautiful works of art. I remember your parents just let you go carte blanche into your room as a kid, and she painted Ryan every square inch of her bedroom with every color she could imagine, I believe, if I remember. Somebody else, Ryan, has written, I really enjoyed your talk. I think we all echo that. Thank you. Yukon is incredible territory, and this Rosanna was lucky to hang out in Dawson in 2012 and loved it. That's
Well,
neat.
we may have walked past each other. It's not a very big place.
Yeah.
No, I would encourage everyone to visit, or also just to learn about it a bit, especially if you're students. There's Yukon College was just accredited last year as a university. They offer a lot of distance education courses, and a lot of it, their coursework is specifically on Indigenous self-governance, Indigenous history, lots of different things like that. The art school through Yukon University here in Dawson is co-governed by Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in. So you can come do the first year of an art degree here, but also get a whole bunch of Indigenous perspective in there too. Also, yeah, we're a very cool place. And it's welcoming to all kinds of people. We are often described as welcoming all kinds of weirdos. So if you feel like that fits you, come on up. You may not leave though. I had intended to come here for one winter semester, and 11 years later, I now have a farm and 3 dogs and a daughter. So things could change.
No kidding. Oh my goodness. I love to you're presenting in a down-filled jacket. Just
so cold
perfect.
here today. It's 33 below. It will warm up this afternoon to maybe 15 below, warm up. But it's this time of year is hard because the sun is back, and so our afternoons are beautiful and really great, but our evenings are still very cold. Yeah. Anyway, I only caught a little bit of the presentation before mine because the other ones were a bit too early for me to wake up. I'm sorry I didn't wake up at 4 a.m. to attend. But I was thinking during the wind power one that my husband probably should have attended that. He's installed solar power. That's his thing. So we have solar power out here because we're too far away from any kind of lines to get power that way.
Unbelievable. Hey, Dad.
I got to jump in just real quick. Can't miss this opportunity. Thanks, Ryan.
Your daughter.
It's kind of like trees. You know, you spend a lot of time with them and you revisit them at different occasions. It's well, this was a great revisit. I just wanted to say, Waliwan, Massacho. And the thing that really resonated for me early on in your presentation, you said, together today for our children tomorrow. That's we have a lot to learn from how things are done up there here in New Brunswick, and the part of sharing and stories and getting out was awesome. So, Massacho, give everybody a hug.
Thanks, love you, Dad.
Love you too.
That document, the Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow, is a very thick text. It was a legal brief, basically, that was presented to the Canadian government and Yukon governments, but they've made a more accessible version of it, which is really interesting. And you can access that for the Council for Yukon First Nations website. And I would be happy to forward that. I can also forward our local schools website, which is really interesting because when you go to kind of the front page for school policies, they're all grounded in traditional Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in concepts and teachings. So those could be interesting resources for people. So I'll send a really big list of things to Pamela and she can maybe send them out to everybody.
I'd love that. Super duper. I would I'll share that environmental science, Ryan is going strong down here in New Brunswick, and we have partnered with Mount Allison, and we're offering a dual credit. So students taking the environmental are expected to do community-based service learning, and Mount A is giving them 3 credit hours towards post-secondary education. So it's a wonderful, wonderful incentive, transferable, I'm sure, to any other institute. But Mount A continues to be incredibly progressive, and has even just started a transformational institute with Indigenous perspectives sort of at the forefront.
They're ditching their anthropology department to make room for Indigenous department.
Yes.
Kind of recognize, yep, we don't want to focus on the old white guys anymore.
Yes, thank you.
Move on.
Well,
the other thing I'll say just quickly is that my friend Georgette in particular, who is in the video that you'll all see, but unfortunately just got to listen to, sent her regrets for not being able to join me today. You all would have much rather listened to her, I promise. But she has said that she's interested in maybe participating in this in the future. So I will forward information to you.
That would be an honor. And before you go, please send me your mailing address. I have something I'd like to share with you. And again, I thank you. You look great. Your room looks awesome. And someday maybe I'll get my tush out to Dawson. I love it. You should have taken, like your dad took us on a virtual tour of his woodlot. You should have taken us on a canoe paddle down there.
Yeah, it's, you know what, though, it's so cold outside that everything stops working immediately.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, I'm going to stop recording